It is time for a session. Welcome aboard. Good to have you with me. Audio is good. Hear everything just fine? Excellent. Well, today's session is a paraliminal that I refer to as the one paraliminal that has saved my life more times than any other I've ever created. It's called the 10-minute Supercharger. Now, the background of how this particular program came about had to do with early experiences that I had in self-hypnosis, also in studying what was called mind control. At the time, in the early 1970s, there was a technique called the Silva method, and I took an offshoot of something like that. It was called Minds Unlimited. And that was a program that was, at the time, talking about how we can adjust our brain waves. It was a very interesting idea. In the early days of self-development, it was also the early days of biofeedback studies where we were looking at the energy that the human brain puts out. And so a hypnotist named Jose Silva used the metaphor of brainwave frequencies to talk about adjusting one's brainwaves or adjusting one's mind to different brain states. So what was being touted as the place to go was called the alpha state, the alpha frequency. And the 10-minute Supercharger was known back then, in those early days, as an alpha nap. So what you do is you place yourself in a state of self-hypnosis. Essentially, you go to sleep for 10 to 20 minutes, and you come up, and you're ready to go. What I would do is I would program my mind for these kinds of experiences. I would look at my watch. This was like between when I was, I had dinner at the dormitory, and then I was going to study at university for the evening. I would look at my watch and say, okay, mind, I'm going to take a nap for 10 minutes. Look at how long 10 seconds is. Awaken me in exactly 10 minutes. I'd close my eyes and I'd zonk out. I mean, you could have dropped a bomb in the room and I wouldn't have heard it. Absolutely out cold. And then suddenly I would become aware, and I'd hold my watch in front of my eyes. I'd open my eyes to my watch, and I would see the sweep second hand passing exactly 10 minutes or whatever time it was that I would set. Now, years later, I found that there are a number of people who use a similar technique without ever learning self-hypnosis or Silva method or mind dynamics or mind unlimited or any of those mind control programs. They just found naturally that that's what they would do. One woman in particular who was a client of mine did a lot of over road driving. She was a saleswoman for a particular manufacturer. Excuse me. And what she would do, as soon as she would feel herself getting a little sleepy, one moment. Sorry about that. What would happen is she would pull herself off the road and she would say, all right, mind, give me the rest I need. She would close her eyes and she would wake up exactly 20 minutes later. Many years after all of this, excuse me, there was a book written called The 20-Minute Nap by Ernest Rossi. It was about what he called the ultradian rhythm. And this is essentially a biological rhythm that helps us reset our brain and our physiology. It's really interesting to realize that the science had come up to validate exactly what human experience had shown for so many years. So when I developed the 10-minute supercharger, it was well before the concept of the 20-minute nap came up. But I want to share with you that the idea behind it was a busy executive could have in her drawer next to her desk a cassette player. She could put on her earphones, hit play, put the phone on Do Not Disturb, close her eyes, go out for 10 minutes, recording's over, come out, and be wide awake, alert, refreshed, ready to go. In essence, what happens every 90 minutes while we're sleeping, we go through a cycle. We start up at the beta wave, which is highly action-oriented, channel 1 out here, and then we quickly go through the alpha state into theta and delta. Then, over the period of an hour and a half during normal sleep, we'll come back up and hit that alpha frequency just a bit. As the evening progresses, during our sleep cycles, 90-minute sleep cycles, we have more and more and more alpha. That's where we have this paradoxical sleep or rapid eye movement where we're having our dreams. So the idea of the 10-minute supercharger is to capture the downward movement just for a moment, going through theta and delta and then coming back up. And it's what I call a reboot. Literally, you know what it's like when your computer just isn't working. All your programs are acting completely wonky. And you're wondering, what's the deal here? Oh, time for a reboot, right? It's the only thing that ever seems to work. When in doubt, reboot the thing. And sure enough, everything starts working just fine. Well, the human neurophysiology seems to need the same thing. When we're highly stressed, what we're doing is we're drawing out of ourselves energy called adaptation energy. It's the energy we use to adapt to our life circumstances. We don't necessarily recognize how much of that we're burning with the stresses or the pressures of the immediate that we're dealing with on an ongoing basis. But if we would tune in, our neurophysiology will tell us, you got to take a little nap or something. But have you ever legitimately laid back during the day for a nap, woken up 45 minutes or an hour later and felt like somebody had hit you in the head with a ball-peen hammer? I mean, you feel worse than when you lay down, right? You know the experience? So if you do this process of programming your mind for a nap, like a paraliminal, most of which are 20 minutes, then what you do is you get that reset. You get that reboot that allows you to come back fully refreshed, focused, ready to go. Now, with the brainwave frequencies, we talk about channel 1 being the outward action-oriented channel. Channel 2 is a relaxation gate. That's where you just close your eyes and relax your shoulders. Channel 3 is the alpha state. And this is where our real learner happens. This is where we're really communicating with our non-conscious mind. Channel 4 is a deep reverie state. We would call this a deep theta state. And in a 10-minute supercharger, you can go through all 4 channels, come back, be fully refreshed, ready to go. So I do want to say one thing about the 10-minute supercharger. While it is a fabulous reboot that you can hit, I think, by experience, it's really good if afterwards you just come back and get into your state a little bit slowly. So I think that while you do hit a reboot button, it's helpful to give yourself about another 10 minutes to just enjoy the glow, allow that experience of having rebuilt your adaptation energy be there for you. So really feel that sense of fullness. Review your states like gratitude and happiness, joy, peace, contentment. Allow yourself to focus on some of those. Go ahead and get going on your task. But what I find is that it takes about another 10 minutes to really feel the full effect of having done that reset. So it's not like you can't move, but what I'm saying is it's really good to give yourself about 10 more minutes to be ramped up fully once again to the action-oriented channel. So the metaphor that's happening on this paraliminal is about filling your reservoirs of adaptation energy. So you're going to hear that term, and that term came to me in the early 1980s from a book called The Work-Stress Connection by Veninga and Spradley. Dr. James Spradley was actually on my board of advisors when I started Learning Strategies Corporation. He was a psychologist, professor of psychology at Macalester College here in St. Paul. And Veninga was a public health professor at the University of Minnesota, which was my alma mater. And the two of them talked about 5 different levels of burnout. The work-stress connection they were pointing out is it leads to burnout. And interestingly, just being excited about something, like the romantic phase of a relationship, just being excited to have a job and to have a new project. And it doesn't feel like you're going to burn out from that, but you are burning adaptation energy. And so I just want to point this out, is it can sneak up on you a little bit. And while you can't always pull away for 45 minutes or an hour and a half, you can find 10 minutes to just do this reset. So I found that I used this paraliminal probably more than any other as I was growing my business. I would come home and it would be a big day at the office, and I had kids at home, and I didn't want to bring all of my work stress home with me. So the kids knew, and this was their phrase, Dad's going to go supercharge. So I'd give them a squeeze, but then I'd go right into my bedroom, change my clothes, put on the 10-minute supercharger, reset, and I'd be ready to go. Now, interestingly, this particular paraliminal was conceptualized for a client I had years earlier when I was running the hypnosis center. I'd worked with a man's wife to help her quit smoking or nail biting, something like that. And she said, I've got, my husband is a high-powered salesperson for Xerox Corporation. He's running a multi-level marketing business on the side, but he's really stressed out. He really has a difficult time shifting gears. And so I conceptualized this program for him, and we called it something really cool. But it was the buffer zone transition tape is what we called it. Of course, that was cassette tapes back then. But I recorded this for him on an audio cassette. It was the buffer zone. So this buffer zone between his work life, his family life, and his second business gave him that opportunity to shift, to become fully present to the next activity that was going to unfold. And this was, for him, a total game changer. And I stayed in contact with him and his wife for probably 20 years. They worked internationally. Last time I spoke with them, they were in Singapore. But it was a very interesting concept of having something that could help us make a transition. And I didn't want it to be the deep relaxation, which would be, 25, 30 minutes. I didn't want to have it be some other program. I wanted it to be something super quick, super easy. So the 10-minute Supercharger was actually the second Paraliminal I ever created. Now, Pete Bissonette will argue with me a little bit on that. It was one of the early ones. But this idea of it being a lifesaver for me, absolutely the truth. I have used this particular recording so many times because of my busyness. Now, I remember one time my wife and I landed in London. I don't know if you've ever flown in that direction. It's kind of tough when you arrive because you leave here in the evening, you arrive there in the morning, so everybody there is ready to go. And anyone traveling that way feels a little bit loggy. So when I arrived, I was booked for a TV interview that night, magazine and newspaper interviews in the afternoon, and in the morning from our hotel room, probably within an hour and a half of arriving, I was on a radio show on the phone. So, I had to be able to hit the ground running. My wife was absolutely passed out in the bed next to me, and I was having a radio show and doing really great, having a fun time, went through the whole day, did beautifully. Guess what my go-to was between each one of these events? 10-minute Supercharger, because it's super quick, super easy, perfect reset, brings me back, gets me into that focus, allows me to draw from my adaption energy reserves and keep on keeping on. So enjoy the 10-minute Supercharger. Play with using it a bunch more. If you haven't made it a go-to for yourself, play with it. It is such a game changer. Thanks for being a part of today's session. Great being with you. Peace and blessings. See you in the next session. Bye for now.